Hello, good afternoon. There are how many of you? Oh, we're complete. Very good. No, we still have to wait for 4 more. Okay. First things first. Remember, we already said so. We are scholars of the nation. Resources of our nation are spent on you, and we should make the best of these resources because these resources could have gone to helping uh, Filipinos elsewhere. But thanks to luck, thanks to our fortune, you're the ones who are getting the resources and not them. All right. Meaning to say, attendance, please. Meaning to say, excuse me, let me share with you my screen. Why? Because we need to check everybody's attendance. All right. So there you go. Everybody, attendance, please fill this up. All right. You already know the rules. Okay. Now, meanwhile, while you're filling up your attendance form, let me tell you about StreamYard. I'm supposed to invite 10 of you to join me for the broadcast. Excuse me. Now, however, we're postponing that. Looks like we have privacy issues. And so let me tell everybody, none of you is required to join me live on YouTube because not all of you are comfortable or feel secure with having your face and your voice on YouTube available for everybody to see from North Pole to South Pole every time we have the lecture. So not everybody is comfortable. We'll have to find out. So I'll do a survey later, either today or next meeting, and I'll ask you to sign up. Those who are comfortable enough to join me for the discussions, I welcome you, but you're not forced to join me. All right, so we'll deal with that later, StreamYard. Facebook, I have yet to solve my problem with the security of Facebook. I'm not satisfied with what I see, and I'm still being advised by Facebook to take care. And so for now, we have yet to activate our live Facebook broadcast. But meanwhile, I think YouTube is good enough, but I'm not satisfied with YouTube alone. Later, will have to come up with a solution because similarly, when you comment on YouTube, everybody's going to see that. And if you're not comfortable with everybody seeing your comments on YouTube, then at least you can have the privacy of the Facebook group. Or in our case, the privacy of our Google Classroom unit. All right? So for now, no StreamYard live for students and no Google Facebook. Meanwhile, let's do some practice. Practice what? All right, let me give you something from Mentimeter. All right. Mentimeter. Okay, I'm going to post. There you go. Hopefully you see it. Okay, Mentimeter. There. This is the link. You can see that. And I'll give you the code. All right, this is the code. This is the code. Can you see that on top of my screen? That's the code. I'll put it on class comments. There you have it. That's the code. All right? And so, here goes our discussion. I sent you Introduction to Greek Origins. All right? This is a guide for you to remember what we will be discussing the whole time. See this? That's the U.S. Senate, United States Senate Hall, Greek-inspired. See this? That's the best university in the entire Taft Avenue in Manila. Yes, De La Salle University along Taft Avenue. All right, the best school along Taft Avenue. Again, you can see structures from the Greeks, and of course, the best school in the entire Philippines, as you can see, Greek-inspired also. All right, so far so good. But I don't want to use this. I'll use. Oh, by the way, for comments during the entire discussion, all right. For comments during the entire discussion, please comment here where I have given you the YouTube link. Comment here, please. All right. Propjerry Public Lectures. This is our link for today. YouTube. Okay, comment here. Anytime you want to make a comment, put it here. Or comment on YouTube. Okay. Now, this is what I'm going to use. This is a better version. So, there you have it. Your University of the Philippines Administration Building. And of course, the inspiration coming from the ancient Greeks. Okay. We are going to talk today about these items. The advent of democracy and philosophy in general, and specifically, this is what we want to understand. First, we want to understand that the advent of philosophy as a discipline is very much related to the advent of democracy as practiced by the ancient Greeks. How come? I'll tell you about it. All right. Now, second point, we want to understand that democracy as practiced by the ancient Greeks has come as much as a product of unique confluence of historical, economic, and geological events as much as other factors that many scholars have so far laid out. Many things have come together, many events have come together in a way that by the time you know it, democracy is being invented by the ancient Greeks. How did that happen? I'll tell you about it. And of course, we want to understand that philosophy as a discipline is a product itself of the highlighting, thanks to the practice of democracy, of human capacity to reason. What has happened? Highlighting of what? Human capacity to reason. Of course, we've already dealt with that. The nature and limits of reasoning. Reasoning with which we are able to foresee the future. All right? And of course, we will summarize and tell everyone how democracy and philosophy have come to be the foundation of Western civilization. Western civilization that is still, even today, uniquely useful. All right? So far, so good. Excuse me. When you're old as I am, that's a good chance that, you become dehydrated quickly. Okay, any comments so far? So far, so good. No comments. Everybody's here, 25. You're supposed to be 28. 3 of you are not yet around. Well, anyway, they can just follow the recorded stream of the lecture later. Okay. So, let me call your attention to a map. All right? Sorry, this is the map. All right? Notice, what is this? All right? This is the Mediterranean Sea. All right? That's the Mediterranean Sea. All right? This is the Black Sea. All right? This is the river of Tigris. Can you see that? The river of Tigris. This is the river of Nile. All right? Nile. Nile goes here. All right? Alexandria is somewhere here. There used to be a river here, not so much these days, but there used to be a very well, full of resource river here, somewhere here. Okay, where is Greece? This is what used to be called ancient Greece. Can you see that? All right. Let me mark that. All right. This is what used to be ancient Greece. Let me do this better. Okay. Ancient Greece. That was your homework. Ancient Greece, democracy, and philosophy. Later on, the Greeks would move around and they would colonize this. But later, this area would become itself highly developed as a civilization and would have its own identity, and it would be called the Roman Republic. All right? Later, the Roman Empire, but I will deal with that later. But in general, what we're talking about are Greco-Roman, or what is called Greco-Roman civilization. Basically, Greek. All right? Now, notice that there seems to be a boundary here. What's the boundary? Water, 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 water. All right? And in fact, this is where we have today the Suez Canal. Around here, that's also water. All right? Going to the... Okay, going in that direction. Let me see if I can still... No. Sorry. Anyway, you can see here water, 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 all right? And then down here, water, 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 going all the way to the Indian Ocean. All right, here. Now, what's going on? Water, 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 and then here you have land. All right, land, 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 land. And here you have land, 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 land. Why? Because there are two tectonic plates involved. Tectonic plates, what are we talking about? All right, let's get back to me. All right. So, Europe and Africa used to be together. And then the tectonic plate, single tectonic plate broke. And then you have two. But at some point in time, they collided. So you have the European tectonic plate and the African tectonic plate, they collide. And when they collide, what happens? All right, let me repeat. European tectonic plate, African tectonic plate, they collide. And as they collide, the European tectonic plate goes up and the African tectonic plate goes down. Now, right between European tectonic plate and African tectonic plate is what we now see, the Mediterranean Sea. All right? That's what you see now. Okay? So, what does this information about the tectonic plates, what does this have to do with what's going on? You know, reasoning and logic. Well, nothing really. I just want to tell you a story. Just a moment. See, this is what happened. You have a tectonic plate here, goes in this direction, and this one goes in this direction. And so there is subsidence. This goes down. This goes down. This goes up. And when this goes up, this is the result. See this? Santorini, all right? Does that remind you of anything? This is somewhere in Greece. Somewhere on the island of Crete. Santorini. My daughter tells me how beautiful this place is. I love this place because it reminds me of the movie Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. Oh, do you remember that? All right, let's look at this. What's going on? So what used to be underwater goes up. And so this is what happens. See, you see here layers and layers and layers and layers of coralline material. Layers and layers and layers and layers of coralline material. Corals. Calcium carbonate. Under high pressure, calcium carbonate becomes what we now know as marble. What we now know as marble, ergo, what we now know as Greek structures. All right? Famous for what? Marble. Now, let's get back to this. All right? Coralline material meaning to say porous. Coralline material meaning to say calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is soluble in water. Meaning to say if it rains, you can imagine after hundreds and later thousands and later millions of years of rain, you have holes everywhere, especially with coralline material. And when you have holes everywhere, water does not collect. All right? Water does not collect. Let's look for a photograph of a Philippine forest. Philippine forest. Not turtle. Who cares about turtles? All right? Images. See this? Some forest somewhere in the Philippines. All right? Published by Michael Angelo Francisco. Thanks to him. All right? See, there's so much vegetation. You know why there's so much vegetation all over the Philippines? Not like in Greece. See how Greece looks like? Compare that to the Philippines. Why? Because in the Philippines, underneath the soil, underneath the ground, is impervious material called clay. If you cook clay, you can have a clay pot, and when you have a clay pot, you can use that as a container for water. Similarly, if you have clay underneath the ground, when water comes in, the water is trapped and stays above the clay layer, and that's what you call your groundwater. Groundwater that we can take out as water in our wells, water that we can use, but similarly water that plants can use to grow, just like what we see here. But on the other hand, if your ground is porous material full of holes, you don't have any water. No water, no plant life. No water, no plant life like this. All right? No plant life. What happens? The minerals available for life stays embedded in the rocks. When you have plant life, plants have roots. Roots get the minerals from underneath the soil. And then when the plants die, the remains of the plants become what you call topsoil. No plant life, no topsoil. No water, no plant life. No plant life, no topsoil. And that's the situation here. No water, no plant life, no plant life, no topsoil. The most that you can get is grass everywhere. All right? Grass everywhere. Well, you're on top of mountains like this, you can sing sound of music. The hills are alive, but no agricultural production. The only trees you find are hardy types of trees, trees that don't need much water like olives and some other trees like olives and olives and olives and not much. And then you have hardy types of animals like goats and sheep and goats and sheep and goats and sheep. So, what's the result? So, what's the result? All right. Thanks to the geological formations, okay, sorry. Thanks to the geological formation series, as I already told you earlier, all right, there's the boundary, all the way there, goes down there. Now, the result is because there is not much plant life, not much husbandry you can have, and mountainous at that, see, all of a sudden everything goes up. No beach. That's why Greeks and Italians, when they come to the Philippines, they're so happy because we have beaches everywhere. But you go to Italy and you go to Greece, this is what you get. No beach. All right? So what's the point? Central parts of Greece have no settlements. Mountainous areas. All right? Especially here. Central parts, no human settlements. Very rare. Now, because there are not so many trees around, what happens is, when there is rain, the topsoil erode, and they go with the rain, and then they collect. They collect certain places, what you call floodplains. So you have floodplains here, you have floodplains there, floodplains there, floodplains, floodplains, floodplains. Where you have floodplains, that's where you have human communities. That's where you have agricultural production. Like if you go to Leyte, Tacloban is a flat area. Tacloban City is a flat area because it's a floodplain. That's why when we had Yolanda, all the flood went to Tacloban because that's precisely a floodplain. Now, what happens? You have here different groups of Greek-speaking communities and societies, all right, developing their own identity and cultures separate from one another because there is no connection between them by roads or trails. No connection at all. Why? Why would you build a road somewhere up here that's so difficult? You know, when you're at top there, you won't even have enough water with which you can survive so that you can build your roads. So, no roads, no connection. No connection, independent development of the cultures, independent development of their behaviors. And with so much differences or nuances between their cultures, when their cultures come into contact, there is conflict. All right? Just like the different communities of Filipinos in the Cordillera Mountains, separated by mountainous areas, the Kalingas and the Isnegs and the Tingyans and the Sagadas, they develop the Ifugaos, they develop their own cultures and identities, and when they get into contact with one another, there is conflict, there is war. Same here. Same here. What's the situation? One, the Greeks have martial society. What do you mean by martial? Meaning to say, the Greeks are so much into preparation for war. They highlight the value of martial arts. They live their life as if they are on war all the time with some community. All right? There's so much conflict going around. Two, you see, because there are no roads, what happens? The Greeks rely on the sea for travel. In other words, they become seafarers and highly skillful seafarers. They go around by sea. So, two things, they have martial behavior as a society, and they are seafaring society. All right? Seafaring. All right? Excellent navigators. There you go. Now, what's going on? In the ancient times, all right, so that's Greece. Now, for the moment, let's put our attention on other items here in this region. All right, what's the other items? In the ancient times, there was, remember, I told you somewhere here was a river, and you can still see the remains of the river, right? Somewhere there. And because of that river, and this used to be so full of natural resources, plus that river, and another here, there was a civilization here called the civilization of Carthage. Carthage. All right. Now, as you can see here, there's another river here. And a civilization developed here, and you know what that civilization is? That's Egypt. All right, Egypt. And as I already said so earlier, here is what you see, Tigris River. And somewhere here is, going all the way here, is Euphrates. There used to be a civilization here. We call that Persian civilization. All right, Persian civilization. All right, Euphrates goes all the way here. Okay, so you have one, Persian civilization, two, Egyptian civilization, three, Carthaginian civilization. And what's common to all of them? They had rivers and they had natural resources. Guess what? Since the 1960s, we have known that there is another civilization here, maybe even more sophisticated than the civilization here in Carthage or even the civilization here in Egypt or Persia. It's called today Minoan civilization. From King Minos, who everybody used to think was a purely fictional character, turns out that he had actually a kingdom here on the island of Crete. What is this island? This island is called Crete. All right, this island here. That's called Crete. And on Crete, you have the Minoan civilization. Minoan civilization. All right? So, there was a time when you had the Persian civilization, the Egyptian civilization, the Carthaginian civilization, and the Minoan civilization. All right? How many? 4 ancient civilizations. Question, what's the characteristic of ancient civilizations? What's the characteristic of ancient peoples? All right, let's get back to Mentimeter. Everybody here, remember I told you Mentimeter? Let's get back to our classwork. Let me give you the Mentimeter. All right. Oh, have I given you the Mentimeter I have? All right. Okay, I've already announced it. Mentimeter. Okay, there you go. You have, let me check. All right. You have the link and you have the code. All right, let me give you the Mentimeter presentation. It's very short, just to practice what's going on. All right, first slide. There you go, and next slide. Remember, last meeting, I asked you a question. Do you still remember? I asked you a question. Do you still remember? Ancient civilizations think that lives of men are in the hands of the gods and the deities. Question. Do Filipinos at large, I mean in general, do Filipinos at large think like them? The ancient civilizations, oh, clerical error, there's a period there, disregard that. So anyway, so that's the question. Do Filipinos at large think like them? Let's see. 67%. Yes, but only some of them, although significant. Yes, and most of them, oh no. Most of them. All right. Guess what? More or less, in my entire career of 35 years, oh my God, I'm old. I've never come across a class who has said farther, who have given an answer far away from 50%. Almost all of my classes have given an answer 50% or more. Now, it's even more significant if you put the two together. Yes, and most of them, plus, yes, but only some of them, you have 38%, or you have 88%. Oh my God. All right? So, pardon the expression, we think like ancient peoples. In a manner of speaking, we're backward. But that's all right. That's the reason why we're here in this class. We're going to change all of that. All right? That's the reason why you are scholars of this nation. You are going to be recruited to become ambassadors so that the Filipinos will leave the ancient age and will step into the modern age. All right? Next question. All right? So you see, more or less, this gives you what the Philippines is all about. Next question. How many of you have taken up some course in high school on the nature and limits of reasoning? All right? You only have 3 ways of answering. Let's see how you're going to answer. Oh, none at all. By the way, if you ask me, in my entire career under the Jesuits, from elementary to high school, I only remember 1 week, if I remember correctly, 2 meetings dealing with fallacies and no more. Nothing. You know, there are 52 weeks in a year, and I only had 1 week, 2 meetings, And I had so many years in elementary and so many years in high school. All right? So, out of so many of you, 19 are saying, well, yes, but only in passing small part, like me. Some of you, none at all. Put them together, you have 25. Oh my God. That's our situation. How many of you have ever thought about why many buildings at the campus, our campus, are ancient Greek inspired? All right. Can you see that? No? Well, that's exactly how I felt. Some inkling, but never really sure about exactly why. But I know there's something into it because I can see it in movies. You know, the American Senate, you know, the Parliament House of Great Britain. And even in Hong Kong, I see many old buildings in Hong Kong are ancient Greek inspired. Same in Germany. You know, you go to the area where you have Brandenburg Gate and you see a short walk away from it, the Parliament House. It's Greek inspired. All right, so there you have it. Uh, the point is, we move back to our slide. All right. By the way, so that's how we're going to, we'll have more questions like this. And later on, I will invite some of you to come up with questions to be put up on Mentimeter, and we will answer, including me. All right. So as we go on with our discussions, imagine questions that you need to answer, and we'll ask the class. All right. With Mentimeter. Okay. Now let's get back to our map. You see, you have one civilization here. You have another civilization here. You have another civilization here. And you have another civilization here. All of them had one characteristic. And what is that? They all believe that the lives of men are in the hands of the gods and the deities. And it has been the same for the ancient peoples of China. Has been the same for the ancient peoples of India, East India. And it's the same for the ancient peoples of North, Central, and South Americas. It's the same everywhere all over the world. All right? And this is what has happened before the time of the ancient Greeks. Before the advent of the ancient Greeks, all civilizations of the whole world were one and the same. They were civilizations that have believed that the lives of men are in the hands of the gods and the deities. But somehow that changed. All right? Somehow that changed. So remember, we talked about the boundary here. All right? Going up, going down. Remember, we were talking about the Greeks. One, martial society. Two, seafaring society. All right? Now, let's add more to our story. Let's add more to our story. Turns out, so this is Greece, Greek island Crete, where we have their civilization. All of these were ruled by priest kings. People who were either considered sons and daughters of the gods and the deities, here, 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 or were prophets of the gods and the deities. And because they were considered priest kings, they had absolute rule, Solomonic. Like King Solomon, he orders anything, you know, cut this kid into half. Nobody questions it. They follow order. That's the law of the gods. Absolute rule everywhere, all over the world. All right? And so in the case of Crete, Crete used to dominate all of this politically, economically, and religiously. In this area, the Carthaginians used to dominate all of this. All right? And so much of this, all right? until here, where you have the Pyrenees Mountains. The Carthaginians used to dominate this, the Egyptians used to dominate so much of this, and the Persians, all of this. And they were absolute rulers, all right? Now, what happens? Turns out, an island over here called Thera. Thera. Or on some books, it's called Thera. On some books, it's called Thera. Now, depending on what book you're dealing with, somewhere between 1300 years BC to 900 years BC, this island, where is this island? Here. All right? Somewhere around between 1300 years BC and 900 years BC. No. 1500 years BC and 900 years BC. This island here exploded. If I remember correctly, fairly recently, the agreement is around, let me correct myself, the agreement is around somewhere 1500 years BC. But the point is, this island turns out is a volcano. And it exploded. And the explosion was so vast, the volcanic ash lingered all the way to the United Kingdom today. What is today called the United Kingdom? Went all over. See, the earth is revolving this way, remember? In the direction of the east. And so what happens? The volcanic ash goes here in this direction. And it lingered all over the British Isles for several days. And we know historically on the records, they have said that because of the volcanic ash lingering without sunlight, therefore, their vegetable patches have died on their gardens. And even worse, the volcanic ash reached all the way to China. And in China, for several days, sorry, let me correct myself. For a couple of days in China, the skies turned from blue to yellow. Why? Because of the volcanic ash coming from this volcano. And so what happens? Of course, Knossos, the central city of Crete, is destroyed. Now let me explain before I continue the story. You see, here you have the natural resources. Here you have the natural resources. Here you have the natural resources. And guess what? There are no natural resources here. So how come there is an advanced society here in the city of Knossos? How could that have happened? All right, and let me answer the question for you. The answer is because traders from here go to trade everywhere. Traders from Persia go to trade everywhere. Traders from Egypt go to trade everywhere. And when there is inclement weather, when the seas are treacherous, they all look for refuge, a safe place to stay, and this is where they all converge on the island of Crete in the city of Knossos. So it turns out Knossos, where you had the civilization of the Minoans, turns out the city of Knossos was just like Hong Kong or just like Singapore. All right, just like Singapore. No natural resources, but so much business going on. Why? Because traders go there. And with all their goods around, everybody's happy doing business. So this was a very progressive area. Until one day, all of a sudden, it is gone. On a single day, it is gone. Why? Because on a single day, a volcano explodes. It so explodes, it changes the color of the skies in China, and in a single day, there's no city anymore. That's what happened. Now, imagine, okay, maybe you're missing me by this time. So let me get back to myself. Imagine in Vatican, somewhere in Rome. Imagine that there is an earthquake. Then all of a sudden, under the city of Vatican, all right, the grounds open up. And all of the Vatican City goes down into the opening. And then it closes. What do you think would be the effect? What do you think would be the effect? Well, let me share again my screen. What do you think would be the effect? Well, in the Philippines, we had proposed a Republic Act for family planning because there are too many of us in the Philippines. And the family planning program was under the Republic Act, which we call the Health Reform Law. And what happens? It does not get implemented despite it being a law. Why? Because of the objections of the Catholic Church. And since 83% of us are Catholics, we have a law that cannot be implemented. So what will happen? All of a sudden, the Vatican gone, I'm so happy. We will finally be able to have our family planning program. I'm just kidding. All right, everyone? I'm just kidding. What happened in Greece? In Greece, all of a sudden, the center of political influence over this area is gone. The center of religious influence over this area is gone. And what happens? Each community, everywhere all over Greece, came to develop its own sense of religion. Religion, with this out of the picture, became civic or civil in nature. Civic or civil in nature. In my own words, it became, in my own words, religion became liberal. Because all of a sudden, the center of authority is gone. Religion became liberal. What does that mean? That means when you go from one community to another, you may come across the same set of gods involving the religion, the same documents involved, the same stories, but you can have different interpretations of what's going on. Interpretations of the behavior of the gods, interpretations of the narratives. It's really up to the individual. It's really up to the individual communities themselves. So you move along from one community to another, you can have different interpretations of the same stories. And even better, within the same communities, within the same societies, within the same cities, you move from one family or one village to the next, you will have your own different interpretations of the same religious narratives. So there you go. Unique to them, the ancient Greeks, all over the world, they had a liberal kind of religion. In China, in Persia, even among the Olmecs, the precursors of the Aztecs and the Incas in the Americas, they had religion. You say anything against the religion, you die. In the case of the Olmecs, they throw you into the sinkholes to be eaten by the alligators. In China, you get to be buried alive. In India, you get to be burned at the stake. Why? Because you insult the gods and the deities. But here in Greece, it's a different story. Here in Greece, you can have your own way of interpreting how you believe your religion. All right? There you go. What's the effect of the volcano? You have civil or civic or civil or liberal kind of religion. Okay, so far so good. Let me add more ingredient to our story. All right, let me add more ingredient to our story. Getting more interesting? All right, remember, we had the boundary here. All right, we have the volcanic eruption here, and now you have this kind of religion. Now focus your attention on this area. Here, Persia. At some point in time, the Persian emperor becomes highly successful, highly dominant. He overpowers all of this region. All right, the Persian emperor. That's what happens. Now what? Well, at one point in time, he had around 200 sons. You know, he had so many wives. And he had 200 sons competing for who will be the next emperor when the emperor himself dies. Big problem. All right? And so there is conflict. Now, let me warn everybody. I am talking about here three generations of Persian emperors. Why? I don't have enough time to tell you all the details of the story, so I'm just summarizing. All right? Let us just say, well, there are three emperors here. At one point in time, there is so much conflict all over the Persian Empire. All right? So this is the Persian Empire area. There is so much conflict. And during the conflict, every once in a while, one of the contenders in the conflict would get soldiers from here. Why? Because remember, the civilization here is highly dependent on the rivers. Euphrates, Tigris. And these are two of the biggest river systems in the entire world. And the Greeks were known for what? One, they were good soldiers. Two, they were good seafarers. Perfect to become mercenaries in the conflict here. So the Greeks, they become involved with the conflict. All right, the Greeks become involved with the conflict. Big problem. Why? Well, when finally one of the contenders, later the emperor, stabilizes peace and order in the region, when finally there is peace and order in the region, the emperor here gets to think about Greece. Because he realizes, so long as the Greeks are that good with their martial societies and other things, other factors involved, there will always be a threat to the emperor. That's the big problem. So the emperor has come to think, maybe I should put Greece under my control. And so, what happens? The Persian emperor, having established peace and order here, sets to invade Greece with 500,000 men. That much. All right? Excuse me. So what happens? Well, let me get back to our other story, part of the story. Remember, Crete became famous because of business, not because of the natural resources, not because of the soldiers. You know, they did not even have fortresses. They did not even have walls around their cities. Everybody was happy to go to Crete and protect it. Why? Because business is good. All right? Trade. Now, when the volcanic eruption happened, excuse me, when the volcanic eruption happened, gone was Knossos. But the traders were still around from Carthage. The traders were still around from Egypt. The traders were still around from Persia. And the traders wanted to have, during inclement weather, where the seas are treacherous, they wanted to have refuge. And they discovered the refuge here in this spot. A place that looks like this with a protected spot and a city here called Athens. They found an alternative to Knossos. It's called Athens. The ships would just have to go into the Athenian Bay, and there you go, protected from the inclement weather. All right? What's the place? Athens. Now, if you were a trader in the ancient times, you needed more than one boat. You needed 2 boats or more. Why? Because you need people, not only goods, you need people to protect you from the pirates. And pirates were everywhere. And so, not only were traders wealthy businessmen, they were wealthy businessmen with private armies. And guess what? They all converge on this spot. They come here, they go there. Where? Athens. With their money and their private armies. Now, the local leaders have some headache. Why? The local leaders are not well equipped to contend with the new visitors. Why? Because remember, Greece has not much of agricultural production because the topsoil is not so good. Remember, this is how Greece looks like. Not much production. What's the foundation of anyone's economy? Agriculture at that time. Not much agriculture. What's the other foundation of anybody's political power? Religion. But religion in the case of Athens was civil religion. And so there's not much control. So you have here local leaders with political power founded on a weak economy and founded on civil religion. Not good. And so there has always been the tendency for the traders to dominate the place, Athens. And when there is domination of the Athenian local leaders, there is instability. There is instability. All right? Now, in other words, every once in a while, some foreigner, like in the Philippines, the Chinese businessmen from mainland China, they come to the Philippines and they dabble with our politics, and you end up losing the West Philippine Sea, and so many things happening. Same in Athens. They go to Athens and they manipulate the local leaders, and there is instability. And when there is instability, not good for business. But they have no choice but to live with it. However, things change after a while. You see, let me tell you, my great-grandmother, for example, and some other relatives have come from China at the time of the Boxer Rebellion in China in the 19th century. They went to the Philippines and tough luck. But what's the point? After a while, they have kids. Kids who think of themselves as Chinese, but who are born in the Philippines and who grew up in the Philippines with Philippine culture and Philippine language, and who get married to Filipinos, and by the time you know it, they call themselves Chinoys. They think of themselves as, on one hand, Chinese, and on one hand, Filipino. On one hand, Japanese, and on one hand, Filipino. All right? On one hand, Englishman, and on the other hand, American. It's the same. And that's what happened at some point in time in Athens. One of the next generation member of the patrician families, why do we call them patrician? Well, patrician meaning to say rich families, all right? Families in control. That's what you mean by patrician. Families in control, oligarchs. And many of them have roots not in Greece, but roots in Persia, roots in Egypt, roots in Carthage, more dominant civilization than, of course, Greece. Now, the next generation patrician oligarch families, there came to be an individual of the name Solon. And he not only thought of himself as a member of these patrician families, or one member of one of the patrician families, he thought of himself as a Greek who had the responsibility to take care of the Greek society. And so he says, I don't like this kind of instability, let's do something about it. And so he gets to help the local leaders using his own money and resources. And so what happens? He suggests to come up with a system. And this is where now you have to see me again. Right? So, here is Solon, intelligent, trustworthy, and well, anything you want, everything you want out of a leader. He talks to all the oligarch families, one family, one family, one family, one family, and convinces them to help. Because he says, I cannot do this alone. And so, he says, stability will be to everybody's advantage, and so everybody agrees. And this is their solution. He comes up with a system where periodically they draw lots. All right? You pick this one, you pick this one, you pick this one. And drawing lots, they get to decide by chance which family gets to serve for 1 year, gets to serve the society for 1 year. All right? That's the first form of the government they have come to invent under Solon. And then what happens? Everything stabilizes and the economy moves on. But then one family becomes too greedy. You know, this family wants the mayor to be the daughter, wants the vice mayor to be the son, wants the councilor to be the son, wants the congressman to be the son, wants the father to become the president. They want everything for themselves. And so, when they draw lots, they only invite their relatives. Having taken the cudgels of the political system, they did not want to release it. And so, drawing of lots became drawing of lots between relatives. This was the time of another fellow, Cleisthenes. Cleisthenes. All right? And let's just cut the story short. Cleisthenes comes up with another system. You see, inspired by the traders from former farmers and former fisher folk, the people of Athens became businessmen. And then they formed communities of businessmen called demes or demes, or some called demos. What happens? They organize themselves into cooperatives. Cooperatives of potters, cooperatives of rope makers, cooperatives of cloth makers, anything that has to do with some business, they have some kind of cooperative. Each cooperative was called a demes or a demos. Now, Cleisthenes pointed out, under the rule of this greedy family, there was a monopoly. And he pointed out, with the monopoly, there is injustice. In other words, he came up with a people power movement. We'll use the expression. Cut the story short. He led a people power movement, like what is happening now in Belarus. He came up with a people power movement, and guess what? They won. And when they won, finally, for the first time in the history of mankind, we have a democracy that we have today. Each demes or each demos had a representative in the Senate. There were 500 of these communities or cooperatives, and in the Senate, 500 of them plus, they came up with all the laws, and therefore you have democracy as we know it today. Now, getting back to Persia, where you have conflict, and getting back to the invasion, when the invasion came, then former enemies in Greece came up with a solution. The former enemies came up with an organization called, pardon my expression in Filipino, kataas-taasang kagalang-galangang katipunan ng mga Greeks. And mind you, the story that I am telling you about right now is actually the story that Jose Rizal came to lecture at the La Liga Filipina organizing meeting where he had as listeners Andres Bonifacio, Emilio Jacinto, and Apolinario Mabini. And this is the story. And so, the former enemies, the Ilocanos and the Pampangos and the Tagalogs and the Bicolanos, you know, the Boeotians and the Spartans, the Peloponnesians, the Milesians, they come together as an organization, having a common enemy. But they ask a question. If we are to organize 25,000 men, because that's the most that they could get, where shall we put 25,000 men? Because we have a problem. If we put the 25,000 men plus the treasury, all right, the money. If we put the army and the navy plus the treasury into the hands of the Spartans, they were saying it is not the Persians that's going to be our problem, it will be the Spartan. If we put it in the hands of the Boeotians, it will not be the Persians, it will be the Boeotians. And so on and so forth. Because what they do as a matter of business, they conquer their neighbors, they make them into slaves, and they make them work to death, and when they die, they harvest another set of neighbors to become slaves. That's what they used to do. And so they were saying, with our confederation, we have a problem. Where do you put your resources? And the answer was, of course, very obvious. You put your resources where you do not have an authoritarian regime, where you have transparency, where you have democracy. And so, because there was democracy in Athens, everybody agreed. We put everything in Athens. Guess what? The war's 3 generations took more than 70 years. With all the money coming into Athens, and with everybody coming together with what? Democracy. When you have democracy, you have debates. Instead of killing each other, you have debates. You have here a technology, a social technology with which you can put together former enemies, kings who were former enemies. You can put them together and have a debate. They don't have to kill each other. Generals who were former enemies, you can put them together. And so, debates everywhere. And then from debates came the highlighting of reasoning. And with 70 years of debates, 70 years of reasoning, it has become part of their culture. Independent of their different religions, everybody had to rely on their capacity to reason. Independent of the religion, independent of the regions they come from, they rely on their capacity to reason. And so in 70 years, they developed the best ships the world has ever known at that time, anywhere else in the world. The triremes. They've developed the best sculptures. They've developed so many things in those 70 years. Later, they come to develop biology, they give it a name. They come to develop physics, they give it a name. They come to develop logic, we are now studying it. They come to develop geometry. You are required by law to study exactly the way geometry they have invented. And thus the Greeks, in their time, in the absence of space age, they were able to say exactly the shape of the earth and how big its circumference was. They were able to say, oh, it's about 40,000 kilometers long, the circumference, and they were correct. That's how advanced they were. Why? Because they highlighted their capacity to reason. And guess what? They won over the Persians. And when they won over the Persians, 25,000 men against 500,000 men. All right? They won. And they were able to dominate all of this area where a belief became dominant. And what is that belief? This is what we today call Western civilization tenet. And what is that tenet? What is that principle? What is that belief? Men can have control over their destinies, their future, independent of the gods and the deities, dependent only on their capacity to reason. There you go. And that is what makes the Greeks unique. They were the first as a civilization. They were the first as a civilization. Okay, let me repeat. They became dominant here. They were the first as a civilization to say that men can have control over their destinies independent of the gods and the deities, dependent only on their capacity to reason. How control? Because they can predict the future on the basis of their reasoning. Guess what? In China, 1,000 years before, they said the same thing. Somewhere around 400 of them, guess what? The emperor did not like what they were saying. The emperor was saying, you are insulting the gods. And so you know what the emperor did? He had them buried alive in public. But in Greece, it was different. In Greece, people who said this became celebrities. They came to be known as scholars. Later, they came to be known as philosophers. And as celebrities, they came to change the world. And so they invented biology, they gave it a name. Physics, they gave it a name. Logic, you're now studying it. Geometry. They invented history in the time of Herodotus, the way you know history. They invented medicine in the time of Hippocrates. Everybody has to take that Hippocratic oath even today. That's Western civilization. Unique to the world. At that time of the ancient Greeks, only they, as a civilization, came to believe that. Individuals elsewhere in the world believe the same thing, but only as individuals. But in Europe, you had a civilization. We now today call that Western civilization. I'm sorry, masyado akong madaldal. Naubos na yung oras, pag-uusapan pa natin. We are supposed to talk about philosophy, but time's up. So next meeting, I'll talk about more about philosophy. But there you go. There you go. Let me share again our screen. I'm sorry, I made a boo-boo earlier. I was talking about so many things about our drawings here, and you did not see. But anyway, let me just tell everybody what's going on. Remember, we started discussing about tectonic plate movements, and then traders and business, and then we talked about volcanic eruption, and then by the time you know it, we were talking about civil war in Persia, and by the time you know it, we were talking about highlighting democracy, and now you have Western civilization. All of these events coming together in some confluence and changing the world. All right? Good afternoon, everyone. Please give me your comments, either YouTube comments or our Google group comments. I'll get back to them and maybe next meeting. Okay. Happy to have been with you this afternoon. Good afternoon.